I was born at Providence Hospital, that's on the south side of Chicago, which was a little unusual because for most African American babies being born at that time, they were taken to Cook County, their mothers were taken to Cook County Hospital. But I'm not sure why they took my mom, to Providence. I was raised in the same area as the hospital. The hospital is at 51st and St. Lawrence. And I was raised in a house at 47th and Langley. I was raised by a mom and a dad. And 16 months after I was born, my mother gave birth to my brother, Theophilus Roosevelt Smith Jr. We were raised in a very loving home. We did a lot of family things together. We didn't have a car, so most of our traveling was either walking or taking the streetcar. The one thing my parents tried to do was to expose us to all kinds of things in terms of culture. My father sang in the choir at church, and so he was very interested in opera music. At one point in time, he wanted to become an opera singer, but it was not open at that time. There were not many blacks singing at the opera house. So they formed a group that my father belonged to with most of the members of his choir. And so they sang operatic numbers. They also did, there's an Gilbert and Sullivan musical that's called The Mikado. And my father played the lead role in The Mikado. And so he would take my brother and I to the rehearsals. Needless to say, my brother and I sat on the front row and we could remember and sing along with everybody's part. So that was something that he was really strongly interested in. And then my mother also tried to get us involved in things that would be something we could carry with us as we grew up. She enrolled me in a dramatics class, and the dramatics class was conducted by a woman called Ethel Mins Lucas. She was pretty prominent at the time. And so with her, I learned how to speak in public, speak in front of various size audiences. We had to learn poems. So I learned several poems that I was able to then go and stand and recite these poems to audiences when I was, I guess I was probably in high school, because I would have to take the King Drive bus to 62nd Street, and it was at 62nd and Rose at her home. Then it was called South Parkway, but now everybody knows it as King Drive. So I did that until I finished high school. So my parents were always trying to find things to involve us in. My mother and father were from Alabama, so every summer my mother and father would take us to Alabama. And the first few times we went in a car, but when we got big enough to travel alone, they would take us to the Polk Street station. We would get on the Hummingbird train, and we would ride from Chicago to Athens, Alabama. And that was always so memorable, those trips were, because we had this lunch that they put in a shoebox. And in that shoebox, we might have a few pieces of fried chicken, a piece of pound cake, and a banana. Now, I'm not sure why the fruit was a banana, but it always bothered me because by the time I got ready to eat, everything in my box tasted like banana. So that was kind of strange, but nevertheless, we enjoyed it. The one thing I did learn about, I guess that was my first encounter with trying to understand prejudice, because there were some stops along the way that we had to keep the shades down, because it was our understanding that there were white people on the platform that were not very happy about black folks traveling in the South. And so we would keep the shades down. And the conductor knew we were traveling alone. So when we got to near those places, he would tell us to put the shades down. So we put the shades down and wait until the train left the station and then move on to the next stop. So he always let us know when it was time to get ready to get off in Athens, Alabama. We had goals. My mother and father set goals and we tried to reach them. One of the things was to make sure we finished school. And so elementary was a given. And so was high school. College was something that we wanted to do, but not sure we could get there because my parents were working parents and they didn't make a lot of money. My daddy worked in a steel mill and my mother stayed at home with us until we were maybe 8 and 9. And so we had those goals and we wanted to go to college, but like I said, they were poor. We were poor. We didn't know we were poor. I mean, we never missed a meal. Our clothes were good clothes, often hand-me-down clothes, but still good clothes. We really didn't know. We had no idea because my mother and father never projected to us that we were in a working poor family. So my mother, being from living in a home in the South, when she came here, she knew that she wanted at some point to own her home. So she always knew she wanted to have a home. They lived in an apartment at first, but as time went on, after I was born, she said that little apartment was not going to be big enough. And so they set about finding a home. And it was really just a blessing. I mean, God works in strange ways. And so they lived 2 doors from the house where I was raised. And they made a contract with the man that owned the house. And the contract was a handwritten contract and a shaking of hands to say, I am going to pay you $100 a month until I reach the total of $10,000. So that is what she did, my mother and father. And so in order to raise that $100, since we were in a working poor family, she rented out the rooms. So we had roomers. That was really something too. The different people that lived with us so that my mother and father could purchase the house. And so after many years of $100 a month, they were able to purchase that home. And that's the home where I grew up. So I never knew anything else except the home at 4726 Langley. Well, was there a key moment or a tipping point in my life when I really became who I am? When I really realized that I was Barbara Elaine Smith, a little black girl born on the south side of Chicago. When I really realized that was when I entered Illinois State University. I had no idea. It was basically an all-white university. We might have had 100 black kids on the campus. Total population, maybe about 4,000. I had no idea until I got to Illinois State. Living on the south side of Chicago, growing up in an all-black neighborhood, going to an all-black high school, just doing things that were all black, didn't know. Thought I was fine, thought everything was okay, thought I was intelligent, thought I could just do anything until I got there. And that's when I first encountered what prejudice really was. I had an instance where I was in a literature for children was the name of the course, and the teacher called me aside after the first week of class and told me that everybody in this class will probably do well, but you will be average. So, okay, what does that mean? What does average mean? And so she said, you'll see. Okay. So when we would take exams, she would give me 2 grades. She would give me an A for the content, but then she would give me an F for the way I wrote it. She didn't like my writing, so she would give me an F. So if you average A and F, that's not so good. And then sometimes if it wasn't A, it could be D over F or C over F or just plain F. So when I got to the end of the course and I tried to talk to her, there was, you can't talk. There's no understanding with a person that has a mindset of who you are, how smart you are, what you can and cannot do. There was no conversation with her. I tried to understand what she wanted me to do, but I never got a clear understanding. So at the end of that course, I failed. That was just one course I failed. I failed another one, failed a math course, same kind of thing. And so I was pretty discouraged because as a high school student, I never encountered anything like that, never. But I did came to understand that what was considered as smart, National Honor Society smart, in a black high school on the south side of Chicago was not the same smart, not the same National Honor Society smart as a school in the suburbs. Basically all white, not the same thing. And so therefore my struggle was great. But I just never encountered that, and I wanted to come home. And my mother said, it's okay. It's all right. You tried and you gave it your best. And so you can always come home. So I came home. But after being at home and a year of more struggles, trying to make up what I had not passed at Illinois State, I said, this is not going to work because I will be in school forever. I am going back. So I packed up my little stuff, girded up my loins, and went back to Illinois State and was able to navigate that system and finish. Took me 5 years. That's why when people talk about their kids finishing school and, they got to finish them, nope, it may not be 4 years. It may be more than 4, but whatever it takes for them to finish is what they need to do. So it took me 5 years to finish 4, but it was okay with me. I was done. Had a degree and could walk away from Illinois State University. Thank you very much. Okay, what were the good old days? Well, I would have to say I'd go back to my childhood. Those would be my good old days. The days when we could walk anywhere, basically anywhere we wanted to go without fear of someone doing something to us. And that was a time when everybody in the community was helping. The proverb that says it takes a village. And that's, I want to say that's what we lived in. We lived in a village because there was nothing that we could do or couldn't do without the help of the neighbors. If we thought we were going to cut up and do something wrong, my mother got the message before we got home because of the neighbors. And it was that kind of time that feeling of being carefree, not having to worry about much of anything, knowing that we had a certain standard because we were Mr. and Mrs. Smith's children, and that the neighbors were watching out for us, not just watching out, but taking charge. If they saw us doing something that was not what they would expect, they would speak to us. And we always responded in a respectful manner. Those were the kinds of things, that's the good old days for me, when kids had respect for adults, when adults could speak to children and not be chastised by that child's parents. Those were the good old days. When you did something you knew you were going to have to account. There was going to be some punishment laid out, but it was okay because you knew it was for the betterment of who you were. And so that growing up period in my life would be the good old days, from the time I was in kindergarten until I left on my way to college. Those were the good old days. Moments, maybe that's plural, that were hard for me. I've had more than one. So that's why I'm saying moments, times when things were hard for me. The death of my mother and father, extremely hard. I wasn't aware that my mother was as sick as she was. I knew she didn't feel well, but I had no idea she was dying. And she left to go to a family reunion in Alabama. At first she said she wouldn't go, but then she decided that she would because they had asked her to give the family history, and she knew that nobody else would be able to do that. So she got herself together and went. And the last time I saw her, we were at 95th and the Dan Ryan, because she and my dad took the bus to Alabama. And so she got out of the car and she was crossing the street. And when she got across to the bus station, she took a few steps and then she fell against the railing. And so I called out to her, and she turned around and looked at me and nodded and said she was okay. I'm okay, I'm okay. And that was on a Friday. That Sunday, she was gone. She arrived in Alabama, Athens, on that Friday, but she was so sick they had to take her to the hospital. And that early that Saturday morning, they took her. And there was pretty much nothing they could do. And so that Sunday, they called me. I had a friend whose daughter lived in Germany, and I had made plans, and Tamela was going with me to this friend's party because she was leaving for Germany. And so it was at that party that my brother called and said, she was gone. And I had to drive back to Chicago, and because it was in Michigan, we were in Michigan, and we had to drive back to Chicago. Probably the longest drive I've taken because all the way home, I kept thinking, I didn't get a chance to say goodbye. So that was the first hard time. The second was my dad. But different from my mother, because we knew that he had cancer and that he was hard-headed. And so he would not let them do what needed to be done. And that was for him to, he had prostate cancer, and for them to remove his prostate and then go on and have whatever else, the radiation, the whatever else he needed. But he was hard-headed. No, I'm not doing that, I'm not doing that. So it was just about a given that he was not going to live. But he was determined that he was going to make 2 trips before he closed his eyes. One was to get to New York, Buffalo, New York, to see his brother. And his brother and his wife were having their 75th anniversary, I believe. I don't know, but it was a big one. So he was able to get there for that. He got home, and he was doing okay. And he said he was going to Alabama. So he went to Alabama. He went to see his folks in Alabama, saw my mother's folks, got back home. And from the time he got back home until he got back home, and that was it. It was as though he said, I've done what I needed to do, so I'm finished. And we took him to the hospital, and in a matter of days he was gone, because when we called and told his 2 living brothers, the one that was in Buffalo and the one in Alabama, they came. The one in Buffalo came first. And by the time the brother from Alabama had gotten here, he was no longer talking. But when he heard his brother's voice, that's what he was waiting for. So my uncle told me to go home. He said he's going to die tonight. He said, no, he's going to die. He said, but you can go. I said, well, I don't want to go. He said, well, no, you go. So I came home. And an hour later, he was gone. So for 9 days, he was in the hospital, and he waited for his brothers to come. And then he was okay. He let go, and he was gone. I only had one brother. And sometimes I ask God, Why did you take him? He was my only somebody. No mother, no father. And he was my only somebody. But then after I ask the question, I can answer it. Because my brother had small cell lung cancer. And by the time it was discovered, there was not much of anything to do. And so he went through the chemo, which was very difficult. And the chemo was so hard that they had to keep him in the hospital to give him his treatments. But once they had done all they could do, they wanted to give him radiation, but the doctor said there's no reason to put him through any more because it's not going to do any good. So with that, my brother said, okay. So I remember one day I was at the hospital and the social workers came in. And they were asking him some questions about, what were his thoughts and about what they would do if he was in emergency. And he said, well, what are they going to do? And they told him, he says, well, first they'll put this on your mouth and then they'll see if you're breathing, and then your heart, and then they'll stick something in your arms and see if you, he said, okay. So tell me this, when they get through doing all of that, am I going to be able to get up and walk home? I said, oh no. He said, well, why would you even present that to me? He said, no. If it's my time, it's my time. And don't do any of that. So that was it. He didn't want to try to be resuscitated or whatever else they do. He said, he used to say to me, you know what? Everybody's going to die with something. He said, this just happened to be my something. And I'm okay. And so, well, if you okay, I guess I got to be okay too. But I wasn't okay. When hospice could no longer do anything, they sent him home. So I went home with him and stayed with him until there was nothing more I could do at home. And he went back to the hospital. And I want to say they took him on a Saturday because that next day I went to church, and when I got to the hospice, the nurse said, oh, you look like you are worn out. She said, let me get you some cover. And she gave me a blanket, and she said, you go in there and see if you can take a nap because you really look so. And I was so glad for it because I hadn't slept well and wanted to go to church and was thinking I shouldn't and I should be at the hospital, but whatever. And I got there, and of course, by this time, he was not responsive. And the doctor came in, and the doctor told me that it was, not going to be much longer. So I want to say that was on a Sunday. That Monday, I guess Kim and I were there. And Kim came every day. We'd sit there and we'd talk to him. And so that last time we were there, we were talking and laughing, and I told him we were getting ready to go. And it was about 8 o'clock. And I said, I know you just holding on. But you don't have to. You can let go because we're all going to be okay. And then next morning, about 2 o'clock in the morning, the phone rang. And the nurse, social worker, whichever one it was, said that he had gone. So I want to think that he heard me. That when I told him it was okay, that he gave up and he let go. And so hard moments, those were my hardest. It's really interesting who inspires me now, because all of the people that I can think of are all gone. Presently, I don't know who I would want to see or who's doing work that would make me want to do what they do. I right now, I can't think of anyone. I can't think of anyone present. But now, when we say inspiration, looking at those people that have gone before me, still inspire me. And the person that I can think about is right now is my grandmother, my mother's mother, who was one generation removed from slavery. And so she was a lone woman. She was married, but her husband died, and she was left with 3 children. She really had 4, and one child died in infancy. So she had 3 children to raise by herself in the country in Alabama. And she was able to work the fields, plow, pick cotton, shell peas, can vegetables. She was able to do all of that and take care of her children. So much so that she sent her youngest son away to college. Now, I can just imagine how hard that could have been. And what I started doing is saving pennies, because I think of pennies as being the way my grandmother probably had to do that in order to send my uncle to college. And when I look at the pennies, and I'm thinking that maybe it wasn't a penny, but that penny is a representation for me of what she had to do in order to send him away to college. It was just miraculous when I think about it, that she was out there in the country with no lights, no electricity, no running water, building fires at night to keep warm, and also my mother going to school so that she could get schoolwork done by the light of the fire. My grandmother was able to do that. She was also able, with those same pennies, to save enough money to pay the poll tax, because you couldn't vote if you didn't pay the poll tax. And so she was able to put that money together to do that. So she was able, one of the first people in my family that I believe was able to vote. So she's not here, but right now she's here for me, because that's inspiration for me. When I start complaining and moaning and groaning about stuff that doesn't matter, I think about my grandmother, who had no electricity, no running water, none of that, had none of it. She still inspires me to shut my mouth, stop complaining, and go on and do what you have to do. I don't know that I would have been strong enough to be a lone female with 3 children in the woods in the South when things were as they were. My mother used to have to run from white men. And so I don't know that I could have done it. That's what inspires me. Yes. 5 minutes to pour into my great-grandchildren, something that can sustain them. So 5 minutes. Well, I think I would say to them, first of all, you need to know the Lord. Jesus Christ, the Savior. With Him, all things are possible. There's nothing that you will not be able to do without God on your side. The scripture tells us that He will never leave us or forsake us. So whatever your situation is, if you feel like it's just the end and you can't make it, look up to your Father. Pray and ask for help, and He will send it. Sometimes, not always when you expect, but He has never failed me yet, and He won't fail you. Oh, who is Barbara? Barbara is an African American woman who, let me see what I call myself. Teasing, tan. I guess that's what I call myself. African American woman with a teasing, tan complexion. I am a mother, a sister, an aunt, a friend, a confidant, a mentor, a teacher, a wife, an artist, and what else would I say Barbara is? An aspiring guitar player. God has placed this song on my heart, and it's great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. He has been faithful to me when I have not done what I needed to do, but I can always count on Him.